Welcome back to the Tool Crib. On the table today we have the Leatherman Wave, or rather we have three generations of the Leatherman Wave. On the left is the first generation, introduced in 1998. In the center, second generation, introduced in 2004. And on the right is the current generation, the Leatherman Wave Plus, which came out last year, January 2018. I thought I would make a video today to show the evolution of the Leatherman Wave, how it has evolved from where it began in 1998 to what we have in current day. Kind of my way of paying homage to the best-selling multi-tool of all time. Now, I want to preface this by saying that the differences between Generation 2 and Generation 3 are specific to the plier head only. Everything else, as far as the implements, the interior tools, locking mechanisms, the whole works is the same on the two tools. So for the time being, we're going to set the Wave Plus to the side, and we're going to concentrate on the differences between the original Wave and the second generation Wave. There's a few things to note from the outside. The first thing is that the original Wave was real sleek and slender because it did not have the same blade width that the second and third generations have. So it had a more streamlined look to it. Few things that we're going to point out here. First of all, the frame sizes themselves are pretty well the same. The only difference is that the original Wave was actually just a tick under 4 inches in overall length, and the second and third generations are a full 4 inches in overall length. Now, the frame itself had more of a boxy shape, or more streamlined and straight shape, except up here where you to get to the access to the finger tools for the blades. Those are pretty much in the same profile, whereas the frame on the second generation had more curved architecture to it. You'll also notice that at the top of the frame it was pretty straight across the top on the first gen, and on second and third gen more curved. Another thing that they added is they changed the stamping on the frame to add these breaks into the frame of second and third generation. There's two things more to note from this orientation. The first is that they used to grind the fasteners for the bottom flush with the frame. You can see how that's flat across there, wherein second and third generations they don't do that anymore, and they just leave them as is. The last thing to note from the closed position is that you can see that the second and third generations have the interior tool locks that was missing on the first generation. It was just smooth frame, and now we have the interior tool locks that are riveted in place right there. Well, now let's get them opened up and we'll start going through some of the interior tool differences. I apologize. First, I want to walk through the exterior tools. There are some key differences there. Let's get it flipped around because I want to get to the main blade is the one I want to look at first. It's been a while since I EDC'd the original Wave. I mean, it's been 15 years. This is actually not the one I EDC'd. This is just a new old stock that I got from my collection. I actually gave my original Leatherman Wave away to my brother when I upgraded to the second generation. So one thing I had forgotten about the blade is, obviously we talked about it being a more slender blade. It's not quite as wide, but the grind on it was different. So you have the regular grind on the front there, but the spine was actually ground down, and it came down into this point. I don't know if you could see that very well, but it gave it more of a spear point, and they eliminated that on the second and third generation. We don't have that anymore. They do some light grinding to the spine, but that's only to get rid of the sharp edges. Now, on the lockups for the exterior tools, pardon me, and this is the same for all four, the liner locks on the original quite a bit wider than they are on second and third generation. Also, because of the break in the frame, now the blades have this little cutout in the back of the spine where when it pivots up and locks into place, it's held by the liner lock, and then the stop contact is right there against the frame. In the first generation, they didn't have that, so they had this, looks like they punched through to expose a little square notch here in the back, and that actually came up and rested against the back of the frame, causing the second point of contact. The next thing we'll get out is the saws. Now the saw and the file both changed in overall width, made them a little stronger, well, made the saw a little stronger. You can see how much wider that is. It gained about 25% in overall width. Made the saw quite a bit stronger than the original. The next thing we'll pull out is the file, and you'll see that there's a little bit more of a difference in the file, because the file on the original, it kind of bends backwards and comes out. It is narrower, but on the second generation it kind of bends forward, and I hadn't noticed that before, apart from being wider, probably like we mentioned before, about 25% wider. The next thing is the serrated blade. Now the grind profile for the blades, pretty well the same. The difference is they used to have this rounded front to the original, and now they're more angular in the front side. And then the choils, the finger choils for the blades on the second and third generation were increased and were quite a bit larger. Made it a little easier to open and close one hand. Well, I guess open one-handed. I never really had any trouble opening the blades on the original one-handed, but it does make it a little bit more comfortable. Alright, so let's get flipped around to the inside of the tools. To the inside tools, and we'll take a look at some of the differences there. Okay, the first thing I want to point out here is that the second generation is when they added the stamping for the ruler. First generation was smooth and didn't have that. The next thing I want to note, we'll get to the interior tools in just a moment, but we were talking about the spring earlier, which is riveted in here. So it actually interacts as a lock mechanism for the blades when the plier heads are open. And when we get to the pliers, we'll look a little more closely at that. But then that is the spring for the interior tool lock. And the first generation obviously didn't have that. So another thing of note is that the implements on the interior tools, the interior implements are a little easier to get out, because they started adding these little nail nicks to the tops of the interior tools. Makes them quite a bit easier to get out. Now, I'd forgotten about it, but the original Wave, quite a bit harder to get out. It was more Victorinox. They did have it on the scissors, which that is something I really want to talk about. I had forgotten about that. Well, see, they were a little tougher to get out. And on the other side, you really had to dig in there to get them to release. Now, they'll clump out, but not nearly as easy as second and third generation. Let's get those opened up, spread out a little bit so we can see them. Okay. See if we can line those babies up a little bit. So on the first generation, because they didn't have the bit exchanger, what they used to do is give us a whole slew of screwdrivers. So we had 1, 2, 3, and 4 slotted. Now they kept the larger 1/4 inch in the second generation, which as we all know, opens up paint cans pretty great and works as a screwdriver as well. Then they had a Phillips in place of the blade exchanger. I'm sorry, the bit exchanger. Now the combination can opener, bottle opener, wire stripper, pretty much the same. It got a little beefier in the second generation as opposed to the first, but the overall design concept was pretty well the same. Then we got the addition of the small screwdriver, the eyeglass screwdriver, in Gen 2 that wasn't in Gen 1. Now the thing I want to really point out here, which, like I said, it's been a while since I even looked at the first generation Wave, and I had forgotten about this, but is the massive difference in the scissors. See if we can get that baby to close up. There we go. So in Gen 1, you can see that those scissors are quite a bit more substantial than they are in Gen 2. So we basically have squirt scissors in the Wave now, but the original had some pretty substantial scissors, and boy, are they a lot more comfortable too, because this arm extends back a lot further. It makes it a lot easier to cut with, where on the new one you kind of have to choke up quite a bit more, and also obviously the scissors are quite a bit smaller. So I wish that they could go back to putting in a little larger scissor. Now the scissors, when they fold up, in the original they seated against the bottom of the frame, and they didn't have that lock mechanism for the interior tools. So they were able to seat against the very bottom of the frame, and I don't know if that's the reason why they can't get them in there, but you can see that the scissors fold up against the top of the lock mechanism here, and there's still plenty of space for the plier head to close. So I'm not sure what the issue is there. I really think that there's the room there that they could do that if they really truly wanted to. Okay, one last thing. I don't know which side it was on. Here it is. The original, for its lanyard loop, if we can get that to separate, there it is. The original, for its lanyard loop, was integrated into the tools for the interior tools. Now on second and third generations, that's integrated into the frame right there. So all you can do is lift up the saw and pop that little guy out, and then you have your lanyard loop integrated into the frame. All right, I tell you what, let's get them opened up, and when we come back we'll look at the pliers. Well, we brought the Wave Plus back in now, and I've put them pretty close together so that hopefully you'll be able to see the differences a little more clearly between the plier heads. So the first generation had a real slim plier design. In second generation and third generation, that was opened up quite a bit. They added, became quite a bit more beefy in the plier head itself. Now in the first gen, you'll notice that you had a pretty wide area for the pliers themselves. It looks like it maintains pretty much the same size for the second generation Wave, and the third generation Wave is quite a bit smaller, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. The soft wire cutting capabilities were pretty small in the original. They opened up probably about 25% larger in the second generation, and maybe got another 10 or 15% larger with the addition of the 154 cm replaceable cutters in Gen 3. Also at the bottom, at the hard wire cutters, it was pretty small area. In the second generation, that opened up, elongated a little bit, gave you a little bit more space to get down on those hard wire. And in the third generation, it's pretty much the same size. Now in the first generation, also in the needle nose, let's see if we can focus there, they used to have, the teeth were quite a bit finer than they are in Gen 2 and Gen 3. So you see the difference there. The teeth are spread out a little bit wider. Now I want to go back to the main pliers between Gen 2 and Gen 3 real quick. So when I first got these, the new Wave Plus, I was concerned about losing all this real estate, because you can see that the opening for the pliers is quite a bit wider in Gen 2 as opposed to Gen 3. So one of the tasks that I use my multi-tool for a lot is to do backups on nuts and bolts. So if I'm using impact and driving, putting together equipment, machinery, I tend to use my Leatherman as a backup on the back of the bolts. So what I have here is in its place is a 3/8 lag bolt, which has 9/16 head. Now we're going to look at how that seats into the pliers for the Generation 2. Now you can see that because the cutters are actually squared off, it comes right up against the head of that bolt. Now that's probably about the largest size. I mean, you can actually get onto a 1/2 inch bolt as well, but that's pretty much the largest size I'd feel comfortable with backing up on a Leatherman Wave, because then it gets out there pretty wide, gets uncomfortable. So when I got the Leatherman Wave Plus, I was concerned about losing all that. But the reality of it is while you do lose a little bit of plier real estate, because those cutters are angled, you actually don't lose gripping capability when you're grabbing a hex bolt or a hex nut. Something that I was concerned about when I first got it, but after using it and trying it out, I realized that it wasn't much of a concern at all. Another difference between the two plier heads between Gen 2 and Gen 3 is that they had to cut this relief for the 154 cm cutters to get underneath there. Let's see if we can. There we go. So they have this relief where the corner of the cutter actually slides up underneath and allows that to move freely. Well, gentlemen, that is the differences between first gen, second gen, and third gen. If you stayed with me this long, I appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. We'll see you in the next one. Wait just a second. It never fails. I always forget something. I told you we were going to look at the back of those plier heads, and I forgot to do it. So, real quick, the back of the pliers on the original were just curved, or were just smooth, where the second and third generations have this raised portion, and what that does is that interlocks with the tools on the side. So as you open it up, it pulls those springs apart, and those push out and lock in into the finger tools of the two blades. So one on one side, one on the other. What that does is, if you're clamping down on something and you hit it real hard, that it locks the blades in place, doesn't allow them to open when the pliers are open, where on the first generation they could. So there was a slight chance that if you had it positioned just wrong, you could cut yourself if something like that were to happen. There is one other thing that second and third generation has that first generation didn't, and that was the ability to add the pocket clip. So you have the pocket clip that will lock in with the locks for the interior tools, and the pocket clip on the Wave is actually pretty nice, Wave and Charge series. And then you also had an additional lanyard ring that you can lock in there too, if you so choose to. Guys, I'm sorry. I appreciate you sticking around, and we will see you next time.